Right now, somewhere in your body, a hospital-grade emergency is happening. A cell just mutated wrong. A virus just slipped past your skin. Your immune system is fighting a war you'll never know about, and you'll win, and tomorrow you'll do it again, without a single pill, without a single doctor, without even noticing. Now take away every hospital. Every antibiotic. Every vaccine, every painkiller, every sterile bandage. That's not a thought experiment. That's simply what being human looked like for almost the entire span of your species' existence. No medicine. No germ theory. No idea that invisible things could kill you at all. And yet your ancestors survived plagues, infections, parasites, and wounds that would send a modern person straight into intensive care. So how did they do it? The first part of the answer is written directly into your bones, and it's more advanced than you'd expect. In 1980, anthropologist George Armalagos, working alongside chemist Mark Nelson, examined skeletal remains from ancient Nubia, a region in what is now Sudan, dating back roughly 1,500 years. Under ultraviolet light, the bones glowed. That glow was the signature of tetracycline, a genuine antibiotic, the same class of drug still prescribed today. These ancient people weren't taking pills. They were fermenting a type of beer using a grain contaminated with a bacterium called Streptomyces, the same organism modern labs later used to manufacture tetracycline on purpose. They didn't understand bacteria. They didn't understand medicine, in any sense you'd recognize. But generation after generation, they kept brewing that same batch, because somehow, someone noticed that the people who drank it got sick less often, and survived infections that killed everyone else. That's not a lucky accident. That's applied science, running centuries before anyone had a word for science at all. The second piece of the puzzle comes from something even less glamorous. Parasites. Archaeologist Karl Reinhardt has spent much of his career studying paleoparasitology, examining preserved ancient human waste, called coprolites, for evidence of the parasites that plagued early populations. What he and other researchers found was a body under constant siege, tapeworms, roundworms, whipworms, sometimes multiple species infecting a single person at once. Life expectancy under this kind of chronic parasitic burden should have been brutal. But Reinhardt's research also uncovered something else in these ancient samples, plant fibers and seeds from species known even today to have antiparasitic properties. Your ancestors weren't randomly eating plants. Across cultures with no contact with one another, similar bitter roots, similar seeds, similar barks kept showing up in the archaeological record, plants that, purely by trial and generational memory, reduced parasite loads. Nobody had a microscope. Nobody could see a single worm egg. But somebody, at some point, noticed that eating this plant meant fewer stomach cramps, and passed that knowledge down before the concept of a parasite even existed. Here's the part that might be hardest to accept. Sometimes, survival wasn't a strategy at all. It was written into your DNA before you were ever born. Researchers studying human genetic history have long pointed to a mutation called sickle cell trait as one of evolution's strangest trade-offs. In regions with heavy exposure to malaria, carrying a single copy of this mutated gene made red blood cells slightly harder for the malaria parasite to infect. It came with real costs, but for populations under constant malarial pressure, carrying the trait meant a measurably higher chance of surviving long enough to have children. Over enough generations, in the exact regions where malaria was deadliest, this trait became common, not because anyone chose it, but because everyone who didn't have it was more likely to die before passing on their genes. Your ancestors weren't just adapting their behavior to disease. In some cases, disease was quite literally rewriting their genome, one brutal generation at a time. There's a fourth layer here too, one that's easy to overlook because it doesn't look like medicine at all. Paleopathologist Charlotte Roberts, who has spent decades examining disease markers preserved in ancient skeletons, has documented something striking: bones that show clear evidence of severe infection, deep abscesses, healed fractures, even signs of ancient tuberculosis, that nonetheless show healing. Not death. Healing. Which means the person survived an infection modern doctors would treat immediately with antibiotics, using nothing but their own immune system, rest, and whatever their community could provide. Roberts's work suggests something important, that the human immune system, on its own, is a far more capable piece of biological machinery than most people give it credit for. Your ancestors weren't defenseless against disease. They were, in a very real sense, walking around with a built-in pharmacy their bodies had been perfecting for millions of years before the first hospital ever existed. None of this means ancient life was safe. It wasn't. Infant mortality was brutal. A simple wound infection could still be a death sentence. Entire communities were sometimes wiped out by diseases they had no name for and no way to stop. This isn't a story about how ancient humans had it figured out. It's a story about how much they survived anyway, using tools you'd barely recognize as tools at all: fermentation, plant knowledge passed down as oral tradition, and a genetic lottery playing out over hundreds of generations in real time. You carry the results of that struggle inside you right now. Every immune response your body runs today is the end product of an arms race that started before written history and never really stopped. The reason a cut on your hand usually heals instead of killing you isn't just modern medicine, it's millions of years of ancestors who survived exactly this kind of injury, again and again, long enough to pass that resilience forward. So the next time you take an antibiotic for granted, or barely notice a small infection clearing up on its own, remember what that ordinary moment actually represents. It's not new. It's not even close to new. It's the latest chapter in a fight your ancestors were already winning, quietly, invisibly, one fermented drink, one bitter root, one surviving generation at a time, long before anyone alive today was born to see it. They didn't have medicine the way you understand it. But they had something almost as powerful. They paid attention, and they remembered what worked. And because of that, you're here.